All right, so welcome everybody to day two of the Brass Fall 2025 online symposium. I'm Nora McKenzie. I am the chair of the Business Reference and Academic Libraries Committee for Brass, and also the co-chair of the Symposia Subcommittee alongside Kelly LaVoice. Thank you to our wonderful subcommittee, who includes Kristen Cunningham, Kate Cummings, Brian Garrison Wynn, and Doris Jui. All of our sessions today will be recorded, and those recordings, as well as the slides for our folks who are presenting, will be sent to everybody who's registered. If you haven't already, please go ahead and mute your audio and your video as we get started. So thank you so much for spending time with Brass today and all of our presenters. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Brian, who will introduce our first presenter.
Thank you, Nora. Everyone, please welcome Georgette Nicolosi of Missouri University of Science and Technology in her presentation, Algorithms and Advice, Undergraduate Students' Digital Pathways to Financial Literacy. Take it away.
Okay, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me, first of all? Yes.
Yes, we
Hopefully.
can.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and make sure everything works. I'm gonna have to do this twice. Okay, is this being shared? Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, and then let me see. Okay, making sure. All right, so sounds good. So my name is Georgette Nicolosi, as was said, and I'm at Missouri University of Science and Technology. I am a business librarian, henceforth why I'm here, and I'm really excited to present this work that I've been working on for quite a while now. And just a note before I start, I deeply apologize. My office is in between two other offices, and it can be quite loud. So if there's any background noise, hopefully my mic will just muffle that and we'll continue going. But okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. So this is a presentation on a study that I've done, a research study. And so therefore I'm going to be presenting the results from that and just talk a little bit about implications. So before I get into all those results, I'm going to go over the project overview and my motivations for starting the project, and then basically how I went through everything. And hopefully the results will be useful for a lot of you who are business librarians, whether you're in different types of institutions, anything like that. Okay, so in terms of the project overview, I basically wanted to conduct a study to understand the motivations for undergraduate students in terms of where they find financial information. And I had the idea for this study because about 2 years ago, I was thinking about, and this was actually prior to like the rise of AI, and I know we're talking a lot about AI these days, but I was thinking a lot about short form content platforms, and that was a time when it was really like becoming proliferated and a lot of people were talking about them, and how often on those platforms you see a lot of financial content being pulled up, and I was curious to see for students or maybe people who are unsupposing and access these items without prior knowledge perhaps, or maybe not expecting them, what they think of these elements online, anything like that. And so that spurred me to want to understand really what they're seeing. I also think that, again, especially in the past 2 years, because we kind of get inundated with news about artificial intelligence and generative AI and things like that, some of these other tools or resources are not being as talked about anymore, when they still are being used highly by undergraduate students. I don't have the statistic here, but I think it is the ages 18 to like 24 that are most using these platforms, or just social media in general. And I wanted to make sure that we understood what's going on there as well, and if we can help in any way as librarians or educators. So in order to do this, I actually received a grant from Brass in order to do this project, which I'll give the accreditation at the end of the presentation. And so I was able to do a mixed method study design in order to interview and talk to students in my institution. Okay, so prior to getting into that, a little bit of some research foundation. So I was looking into the research, what's been done, obviously, before I started this. And there has been a lot of information related to financial literacy, specifically Ash Faulkner at Ohio State, I feel like is really great in terms of knowing and understanding and learning about how undergraduate students or students in general learn about financial literacy or what we can learn from those interactions. So I am pulling a lot from her studies, as well as one of my previous coworkers, Lauren Ryder from Penn State, who works a lot with ASH, and of course some other researchers as well who are studying this. And so there has been some, studies that have said that a lot of students look at least the internet for financial information, which kind of supports my investigation to social media. There's also been some research into how librarians are addressing these needs in information spaces. And then I did find some research about some researchers were studying financial behavior and content on social media and how people look at that content that pops up on social media related to finance, but they haven't done studies necessarily on undergraduate students. So I kind of found that gap after looking at this research. And so after all this, my research questions became, how do undergraduate students utilize social media platforms for seeking financial advice and improving financial literacy? To what extent do they trust the information they find? And then what are the perceived benefits and drawbacks of using social media tools for financial information seeking among undergraduate students? And I just decided to talk to undergraduate students because I think, again, they are they're coming into college right out of high school. They're kind of a newer group. They're having all these learning experiences, and I thought their experience would be a little bit different from some older students. All right, so in terms of methodology, as I mentioned, this is a mixed methods approach. And so I wanted to survey students in order to get like a nice wealth of material, but also I wanted to do interviews in order to talk to them a bit further. So my intention was to do a survey for 100 participants, and then I wanted to do interviews for at least 25 participants. As part of the grant that I received, I was able to provide gift cards to the students who were participating. So for the students who did the survey, they got a $10 gift card to Starbucks. And for the interview participants, they got a $25 gift card to Amazon. And then the rest of the money that I was able to be given was used for conference materials and everything like that. I ended up with about 100 and a little bit over 100 participants, but I had 24 interviews. So I was able to kind of mix the money a little bit for that if you guys are interested. But so I didn't have a full exact 100 participants and 25 interviews. And then once I did all of this, after they participated in the survey, I selected the students who said they wanted to participate in interview. Obviously, I couldn't collect all of them. And then I conducted interviews, which were about 30 to 60 minutes, usually more so around the 30 mark. And then after that, I coded and analyzed the interviews, which I'll discuss a little bit later on. Okay, so let's talk about the survey overview. So in terms of my survey questions, there were kind of 4 categories that I was looking at. First, demographic sections, which hopefully is obvious, and then general social media use, so platforms used, frequency, purpose, and then kind of getting into the financial information seeking behavior. So how often do they see financial information popping up on social media? What do they do when they see that financial information popping up? What do they think about it? All of those types of things. And then finally getting a little bit into trust and evaluation, accuracy, things like that. So the next couple of slides will just be basically showing some of the results from the surveys. They're not the most beautiful designs ever because I'm pulling them directly from Qualtrics, but I'm hopefully selecting the ones that are most interesting and will kind of inform what I studied in the interview. But if you have any questions or something that I didn't talk about, please let me know and I can answer questions after the presentation. Okay, so in terms of participant demographics, I don't have the slide here, but before we get into this, I want to mention that I had about 49% of students were male, I think, and 50 or so were female. And then I had some people who didn't want to disclose, and then people who had chose a different gender or anything like that, or chose to write in what their preferred pronouns were. But I did think this was a nice demographic because some context about Missouri S&T, we are I think even closer to 80% male dominated campus. So I was happy that there was quite an array of students in this pool. And then in terms of demographics, henceforth the name as well, we are mostly a science and technology campus. So this was the breakdown. Most students were students who were majoring in some form of engineering or computer science, but I did have some students from our other 2 colleges as well. Okay, and then social media platform use. The first kind of important question I think was, which social media platforms do you use regularly and which platforms have you used for financial information? I will say I apparently neglected a highly used platform here, which is Snapchat. I didn't realize that so many people still use Snapchat. And so if anyone typed in other, they were saying Snapchat for this information. But it is interesting to see that most people are using like YouTube quite often, even more so than like the short form content platforms that I was expecting, just for general use. And then the kind of the same design follows for the financial information as well. And in that regard, I do find it a little bit more interesting that people were using TikTok quite often versus Instagram. I found out later in my interviews that a lot of people seem to be quite negative about Instagram as a platform overall. But again, it's kind of a fun breakdown to look at. And then I asked, how often do you encounter financial content? So I don't know about all of you, but I don't encounter financial content all that often on my social media. So I was kind of surprised that there are a lot of people that encounter it like a few times a week at least, or multiple times a day. But again, most people said at least or less than once a week is probably typical here in terms of how often it comes. And I wasn't looking at a particular application here. This was just general social media across all the platforms that they use. In terms of the financial topics encountered on social media, the one that I'm not surprised by and that seems to have come up a lot is budgeting and also investing. And at least for me, the reasons why I feel not surprised by this is because when something does pop up on social media and based on my research, I found that investing is one of the ones that comes up the most, which can also be interesting because investing causes a lot of risk taking, or I guess more risk taking than other financial behaviors, I suppose, like just budgeting a normal budget sheet or something like that. But at the same time, it makes sense because there are a lot of content creators on social media who discuss, what they have done to acquire a large amount of money, or what specific investments are more useful than others according to their expertise or whatever they're saying they have. And so, again, it may not be that surprising. And then personal finance success stories kind of goes hand in hand with that as well. I really wanted to know what people do when content comes up. So a lot of people said that apparently they save the post for later, which was interesting. In terms of the people who said other here, I've realized within talking to the students in relation to the survey, but also the interview, is that a lot of people actually talk to family quite often about their finances, which is very interesting to me. I feel like I wasn't talking to that many people about my finances when I was in college, but maybe I was just an anomaly. I don't know. But when people were saying other, a lot of them said, oh, if something comes up on my content, I asked like my mom to explore it or like to try out whatever they're suggesting or something, or they bring it up to another family member who like has more knowledge in finance or anything like that. And so that was curious to me as well. A lot of them mostly said if they did select other, they mostly said they just kind of like put it away in their brain and they think about it later and say like, huh, that was interesting, but they don't do much with it. And then it is nice at least to see that some people are researching the information further depending on the source. In terms of trust, this is my breakdown for trust. Not surprising, I guess most people at least somewhat trust things, but again, I think a lot of people are really highly dependent on the content and the platform. And as said before, this was not content specific on a particular platform, this was just social media overall. And then what criteria do you use to assess the credibility of financial information on social media? Most people were saying that it is consistency with other sources and personal experience. And that kind of goes hand in hand with something that I'll talk about in relation to the interviews, as well as professional background. And I was pleasantly surprised to see professional background there because usually when you're getting content that pops up, unless you're looking for something on like a long form platform like YouTube, usually those videos are very short and you don't really typically click on someone's account to find that information about someone. So at least it shows that some people are looking to see, who is actually talking to me about this information. And then this is not my favorite graphic ever, but I thought a pie chart was, the most visually makes sense for this presentation. But have you ever applied financial social media advice in real life? And I had an interesting breakdown of yes and no. And most of this was budgeting related. So just like a simple budgeting tip sheet or anything like that. As will be talked about, a lot of people are kind of fearful of investing advice. And so it wasn't really anything more hard hitting than budgeting in this regard. All right, so now we're going to get into the interview portion, which follows up obviously the survey and what further analysis and insights I got from this in particular. So this is quite a heavy text slide. The interview questions were just like it's very similar to the survey, but just getting way more in depth in terms of like examples and what you could actually pull out of the survey. So I was asking a lot of students to give particular examples of a time when they applied financial advice. If there's any particular platforms that they like and dislike, why do they like or dislike certain ones, how they actually walk through and make decisions about what they're going to engage with in social media. Obviously, why do they find things more credible or not credible? And then for their expectations for platforms in terms of asking them, should platforms have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the content they put out there is accurate? How much responsibility is, again, placed on the platform to do this, or is it really placed on the person to analyze the content themselves? Anything like that. So that's usually what I was looking for in this. And now that we're on this page, I kind of realized that I made a mistake and I forgot to mention two questions that I didn't have a full graphic for because they were open-ended responses. And one of the questions were, what are the benefits of using social media as a source for financial information, and what are the drawbacks? The drawbacks were mostly related to scams. So some people did comment on like misinformation and disinformation and things like that, but a lot of people seem to be very frustrated with the amount of scams that were going on social media. So like, or people that were just talking up a lot of certain content, again, probably related to investing. And then in terms of the benefits, a lot of people noted that it was good for for people who've never had exposure to any type of financial content, who didn't learn about it in high school or maybe in general, not even related to students. And so they thought that was great about it. And also obviously ease of access. It's free advice, basically, since you can download the social media platforms for free, and it's quick and it kind of comes to you rather than you having to seek it out. So it could kind of jog your memory, kind of jog your brain without having you think about it as much. And so those were the overall benefits and drawbacks, though I have quite an extensive list. And so they would probably be fleshed out a bit more in the actual article I write. But I wanted to mention that before going into interview questions, is because I thought those were pretty important. Right. So for my interview coding process, like I said, I had about 24 interviews with students, and these were I met with them either over Zoom or in person if they were on campus. And so I recorded them in both situations and took notes. And then I used a tool called Atlas TI to code my interviews. I chose this tool because I've used it before, and it has a nice like student version for people who are able to get a student platform. And I'm also a PhD student, so I was able to take advantage of the student version of Atlas TI. And so it basically looks like this. This is not a screenshot of my text, but just like a general screenshot from their website. And you are able to code, for those of you who haven't used a coding system before, you're able to code and apply themes. There is a new AI tool in there that will manually or automatically apply themes for you, but I didn't use that because I found it to be way too overwhelming. So what I did was I went through all of my transcripts and I created a code book. I think I had 24 codes overall, and these ones on the screen, the 1 through 6 on the left-hand side, are my like parent codes, so my overall subject headings. And with each of those areas, I had about like 4 to 5 different codes. So for example, under like social media use, one of my codes was platform preference. Another one was entertainment, like they were using it for entertainment. Another one was for creative or business use. And so I would go through each interview and code whenever I saw those type of topics coming up. So if anyone has questions about this, please let me know. But obviously, if you have more than one researcher on a coding project like this, it would be better because you have someone to actually do that like intercoder reliability checks to make sure that you actually have a nice way to look at all your codes. But since it was just me on this project, I just did it myself. It was a very long process, but it worked out really well in the end. And so those were my overall codes, which again, I hope to flesh out more when I actually produce an article on this, but that's what it looked like as well. So rather than showing you like my coding groups or anything like that, I decided the best way to talk about this would be more so to just pull out the major results that I'm seeing from students. I will say before I know anything is that quite a lot of the students that I talked to said that they had some form of financial, like a class or something that they took in high school, whether it was like an actual financial class or whether it was something to like get students associated in thinking about money or the future. So that was interesting to me because, like I mentioned, when I'm kind of bringing in my own thoughts about this, I personally didn't have that when I was in high school. So I think a lot of them were introduced early on. But most of the time, when students are seeing financial content, they are seeing it passively. So it is kind of just appearing to them through the algorithm. They did find that in terms of all social media platforms, that YouTube is the most useful platform because the videos felt more researched and credible. Though when I prompted them about a tool like Reddit, which they didn't actually usually come up with themselves, I would ask them about it. They often all reacted well and said, oh, actually, yeah, Reddit would be a really good tool for this. I actually really like Reddit. And to them, they seemed to think that Reddit was the most trustworthy platform because they like the idea that it's like real people talking and seemingly as like pragmatic advice rather than emotional advice, which is interesting to me because in other parts of the interview, I would ask them, when you're looking at a social media application, do you ever look at the comment section and do those comments help you like further contextualize whatever the video is about or anything like that? And most of them said no, that they thought the content in the comments was like more problematic than the video itself. Which is, in my opinion, at least oppositional to Reddit, which is a highly like commentary, platform. But it was kind of interesting to see that. I will say that I do know that Reddit has like very specific demographics, and their own website describes this. They're like mostly male commenters on Reddit. They're mostly like in a certain age group, like usually in their early 20s, and so that might heavily influence what's going on like forums related to finance. But I did want to note that because I thought it was interesting. And then most people said that they judged creator experience, use of sources, and presentation style, not by popularity or follower count. And like I mentioned before, a lot of them seem to talk about these subjects with their parents. So they often cross-check. And then continued results. As we hopefully can tell, there's quite an intense theme, I think, in my opinion, across the topics here, which are that many people are wary, annoyed with profit-driven content and these like get rich quick schemes, as well as like crypto hype and anything like that. A lot of them seem to be interested in investing overall as a topic, but they don't want to learn about it on social media, is what I'm generally understanding, at least from the interviews I've done. And so sometimes it seems that all of this like get rich quick schemes and everything going on, these highly emotional subjects that pop up on social media, they're so common that sometimes because students get those the most, when something does pop up, they kind of like overlook it because they're like, oh, great, another financial video or another financial comment or something. I don't want to get into that because I'm so annoyed with like the heavy presence of other types of topics. So sometimes they even get dissuaded from using social media as a content source just because of that annoyance with specific types of videos. And then finally, when I asked them about regulation and, that question if platforms should moderate or anything like that, most of them were split. Some of them said that, content platforms don't have to moderate what's going on because people should be literate enough to make decisions on their own, which I found was interesting. But then again, about half of them said that there should be some form of regulation, even if it's just like a lot of content warnings or anything like that, telling you to do your own research. And so I thought that was interesting as well. Overall, it seemed like at least the students I was interviewing are quite fiscally fearful, is in that they are pretty adverse to taking on debt. Like I said, they're interested in investing and things like that, but they don't even often seem to want to open something like a credit card or think about, ideas that might be considered good debt, like a mortgage or anything like that, because of maybe this dialogue of things snowballing or getting out of control when you think about finance. Okay, so overall project conclusions and takeaways. I'm keeping track of my time, so a couple more minutes. So conclusions and implications for educators. What I think this tells us is that financial literacy really does in modern times depend on digital literacy, and students are learning of financial concepts through social media behaviors. Again, going back to what I've been saying about like the proliferation of generative AI, I think it's important that we go back and make sure that we are keeping track of other tools that are relevant in student lives. And so social media platforms are some of those tools. I think that we can incorporate instruction for those tools. I know a lot of people do like social media instruction in general and things like that, digital instruction too. But we can use kind of social media case studies, I think would be a good idea. And personally, in my own job and what I've been doing in my institution is I've been trying to incorporate some of these subjects when I do financial outreach or anything like that, which I won't talk about too much right now. But it can be interesting also because sometimes you don't know where all of your students are at. So if you're not speaking to a specific group that you're familiar with their knowledge base, sometimes I personally find it difficult to assess like how much of some topic is interesting, how much do they already know, am I telling them something that they already know? And so I think trying to start small and then reaching out and broadening your view from that can be useful as well. But overall, it seems that students are really not passive consumers. They are highly engaged, and maybe sometimes they just need a little bit more guidance or maybe someone to talk to them individually about their specific, situation, especially because there can be conversations about what type of debt may be better to take on versus others, or how can we help them with understanding investments and things like that. And so I think there are quite a lot of opportunities here in this space. And then limitations, next steps, as always, as mentioned, my university is kind of specific with the student group that we have here. So obviously this only captures data from one student population. So I'd be highly interested to know if anyone has other further experience and can provide some further context. Furthermore, social media landscape often changes rapidly as we see. So sometimes all of these trends shift and it can be hard to generalize findings. Even though I've been kind of talking about not focusing so much on AI, I still think there's an opportunity to analyze what they're using AI for in terms of financial content, and then obviously expanding to different institutions and user groups as well. These are just my references that I've been using for this study. And then finally, I'd like to mention and acknowledge again that the whole project, which will have this title, and it's what I proposed, was sponsored by BRASS, by the 2024 BRASS Research Award. So I highly recommend, proposing your research if you want to do something similar or do something as well. And I think that is all I have. So 3 minutes. But yeah, thank you. And I had some questions, some reflection questions that I wanted to ask, but I can feel free to interact with me in the comments or anything like that. And we can talk about those too. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, I think the one question I wanted to know, if people don't want to like unmute yourself or anything, I was wondering if anyone knows or what they think that their patrons or students are using the most, like what platform or where they're getting their financial information from. Okay, so I see a question. What was most surprising to you personally from your research findings? I think maybe this was just me being like highly skeptical and negative or like basing it off of my own experience. I think I was just surprised to see again that people are having these conversations really early on in their career. So I was getting a lot of interactions from like freshmen and sophomore as well, and they're already thinking about this quite often and having conversations. So I thought that was really interesting, and they are quite aware of what's going on social media, and they don't really want to engage with it that much, or at least I think about it. And so I kind of had this like thought in my brain that maybe they're relying on it too much, but it seems that they are quite, I suppose, conservative with their views in a good way, which was nice to hear as well. Okay, so someone asked, did you have a chance to ask students in the interviews about the value of library-run social media accounts? Would they have more credibility? I didn't ask them about that, and that would be a really good question to ask. I would be curious if people have experience with this. I actually don't know how highly engaged students are with our personal platforms. We just have like Facebook, Instagram, and I think that's it. And so I'm not sure like how if they would see it more credible. But that's a good question. I should have asked them that. Um, yeah, okay, I'm seeing some people responded to similar questions as well. I didn't test people's personal financial knowledge. No, I was just mostly wanting to see like the credibility aspect of it. If I did ask them any specific questions about their own financial knowledge, it was just like whatever, if they've had education before. And again, a lot of them has said yes. I don't know what the numbers would be for that. But yeah, I didn't ask them any like probing questions like that. Okay, so Steve's asking me, this is a loaded question. Does the choice of using social media to learn about personal finance result in different attitudes about finance versus using traditional media or older types of sources? I think that is an interesting question. I don't know about the other types of sources, but I think that I don't know. I think that, well, I'd be curious if people want to comment in the chat section if what they think their patrons or students are like in terms of that fiscally fearful thing. At least what I'm understanding from my results is that because of this like high proliferation of content, and these like schemes and scams and things that are like highly emotional, that's leading to this idea that, like they don't want to interact with it at much or at all. So they're becoming more fearful in terms of taking on debt or considering these options. But yeah, I would be curious to know if people have other experiences with that too. I think that's a good question. Okay, so someone asked about my approach to financial outreach. So actually, this study that I was doing, I can't remember if I started before or in tandem with my own approaches. So on my campus, like I said, it's quite small, and we haven't had any types of financial outreach that wasn't like your very straightforward, like what does your student loan account look like right now, or like how do you analyze your school budget or something like that. What's it called? Tuition. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. And so that was what the financial office was doing. And so I was trying to approach it from a different way to kind of just get them on this financial literacy mode. And so the very first session I did was last year, and I just did a session on showing them kind of this type of content, but showing them like more, I don't want to say fun, but like things that they can interact with more online. So like podcasts or YouTubers or people that are vetted a little bit more to engage with this type of content. And then at the end of that session, I introduced them to a budgeting tool that I thought was really helpful, which is a digital budgeting tool, to analyze that behavior as well. And then talk a little bit about credibility. So I was trying to gauge on that what they knew from that session. And from that one experience, that's when I learned that a lot of them want to learn more about investing. So my next session ideally would be mostly about investing or like an introduction to investing. And again, kind of understanding the credibility of people who talk about that online. And then after that, I did that main session. I did two sessions for like smaller user groups. So one was actually for the math club, and I did some for sororities on campus as well. But I will be honest, I'm only the only person on campus doing this right now. My little team that was working with me kind of has dissolved a little bit. And so I'm working through to see how I can get more people engaged. I would ideally like to get some business professors engaged and make this more of like a campus project, but I will have to think about this a little bit more. But if people want to say what they've done on their campus too, that would be really helpful and good to know. But yeah, that was a really long answer. I just wanted to be verbose, I suppose. Okay, so someone asked, I'm curious if you found differences in opinions, reactions to different types of popular financial influencers. Yeah, I have had a lot of people talk about Dave Ramsey. I from what I understand, they'd mostly think he's funny or it's like amusing, but they don't really take him seriously. There are some content creators that on TikTok, especially that I know of. I can't remember their names right now, but they've come out to like write books or they kind of pull in their past experiences a bit more, and they seem to like those ones or trust them a little bit more. I think the Dave Ramsey of it all is a little bit too emotional, or at least when I brought it up, they kind of just laughed. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure about Alex Hormozy. I would have to look that one up. But yeah, that it probably has influenced their engagement. And I don't know about all of you, but like someone like Dave Ramsey pops up a lot on my platforms, whether I'm looking for financial content or not. So that also might have driven those reactions that I've been talking about, where they see certain types of content and then they get yeah, like turned off from financial content overall. But think, yeah, I think that would be my answer to that. Okay. Yeah, I've been curious about campuses that offer financial literacy courses. There was also like at one point a push on my campus to maybe start something like that in a like along with some other early like before you start school Canvas courses to get oriented. I don't know if that ever like actually took off, but I thought that would be somewhat of a good way to get integrated. Again, I don't know how all of your students are, but something that I've been noticing with a lot of students I interact with is it can be difficult to get them engaged with something that they don't want to do for credit or that they're like not required to do. So sometimes I'm curious about like the engagement if I would put out something directly through the library. But it could be a good, I don't know, could be like a good case study to see how they interact with it as well. I did have quite a high turnout for that very first session I did. So it might be interesting. Right. Well, yeah, thank you all for your engagement, by the way, in the chat session. I'm happy that everyone seems to be involved and has different experiences. It seems really great.
All right, wonderful. Any other last question? Okay. All right. Doris, you can go ahead and stop the recording if you'd like, please.